Okay, for starters, I'd like to apologize for the having to set up the camera this way. My usual one is broken. Very often, some people will claim that building a gaming PC is too expensive or too complicated for serious consideration for their needs. It can be expensive, it can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. I'm going to cover some of the basics, and I'm going to cover them in this order: graphics card, motherboard and power supply requirements, versus requirements different games call for, and then advantages and weaknesses of specific components from specific manufacturers. Now, most of my entire life I've been working with computers, learning how to make them do things on command, from writing my own programs in QuickBasic years ago, to debugging things that other people have written, to building my own machines and those of others, as well as maintaining those of others. At the same time, I soaked up whatever knowledge on the subject I could, from those willing to teach me directly, or more often, those who wrote text intended to teach whomever would listen if they would just heed the instructions within. Just as you have to budget financial resources to purchase components, you have to budget power resources to run the machine that you have in mind. And that means some math, and looking at the technical specifications of your chosen equipment. For starters, graphics cards and motherboards introduce variables into the power supply requirements, and they need to be accounted for off the top. Generally, your AMD cards will run hotter and louder, and you'll notice them. But they're more cost efficient, at least in terms of their video cards. NVIDIA's video cards generally run a little cooler and a little quieter, but they have a higher cost to achieve the same results. Now, there's no specific trend between the two brands. One has to pay attention to the packaging and user manuals and reviews on the store pages for wherever you're intending to purchase your items from. If it's not listed there, then you can search online for the model that you're interested in. An example, I'm using an AMD R9 280 on my computer. You might also look for an NVIDIA 1080, I believe that's their current offering. And the words technical specifications after the model, when you search in Google, should provide your required information. Of course, power requirements also have to fit what you intend to do with the system in question. For example, Elder Scrolls Morrowind has much lower requirements than, say, Fallout 4. You have to make sure the equipment you obtain is capable of handling what you intend to play with it, without going so far overkill that you crush your budget underfoot like a bug. Requirements of the games you wish to play provide the minimum baseline you should aim to build for, and thus what hardware you should obtain. If your games require or take advantage of NVIDIA's PhysX technology, for example, then you'll see better performance from their cards in general, as it's specific to their equipment. AMD's similar killer app feature would be FreeSync. Does very much the same thing. NVIDIA has ShadowPlay for recording gameplay to video, while AMD has GVR. There are also, of course, standalone methods for people that want to use the opposite card. NVIDIA is also capable of streaming to Shield devices. It's a handheld gaming platform that has come out in the last couple of years. AMD can't do that natively. Both companies have their own physics programs for handling hair movement in 3D environments as well, which may seem like a strange thing to specialize in, but there's a large market for it. For AMD, that would be TressFX, and for NVIDIA, that would be Hairworks. If you're lucky, you'll see those specifications listed on the box of the game you're interested in. You also have to make sure the card supports DirectX and OpenGL versions required for the games that you have in mind. Some budget AMD cards are essentially rebrands of previous generation cards, perhaps with some more RAM or extra features added, and some current NVIDIA cards aren't expected to provide full support for the next version of DirectX coming out, while AMD generally plans ahead for that off the gate. Graphics cards also have power requirements of their own, and it's important to remember to take them into account when you're purchasing your power supply. Attempting to run a top-of-the-line card from AMD on a top-of-the-line motherboard from AMD with a budget 450-watt power supply is going to end in wasted money and tears, as I can speak from personal experience on the matter, unfortunately. If you have doubts about your power supply unit, well, fortunately, and this is one coincidentally, most of them are marked on the unit itself with how much wattage they produce. you'll look for output wattage, or something to that nature. This one, for example, says output 235 watts. This would not be sufficient for most modern machines. It's an older power supply. I brought it for purposes of this speech. Now, program requirements sometimes get into more specific requirements as well. The aforementioned PhysX, or maybe Crossfire or SLI, which are multi-monitor requirements for different hardware. And not all pieces of equipment offer this. It's important to weigh what you want versus what's affordable versus what's available. You might need to do without certain features to have other features, depending on what's more important to you. Certain components possess certain advantages over others. Learning these can be fundamental to building a problem-free machine. For example, when it comes to their main processors, AMD processors tend to run cheaper, while Intel tends to make a higher performance chip. However, there's exceptions to this. For example, if you're buying a quad-core or more than quad-core processor, AMD's quad-cores and higher tend to be much, much cheaper than Intel's. And this might let you come out ahead if you buy a better chip from AMD than one you might have purchased from Intel. AMD comes out ahead most of the time in terms of overclocking, that is, running processors at higher than expected speeds. AMD offers it as a standard option on many of their processors and have for many years. Intel used to offer it reasonably on a number of theirs, but their current offerings, they only offer overclocking on one particular line of processors, specifically the G3258. In terms of power requirements, Intel performs much better. Very simply put, AMD processors are regularly simply more power hungry than their Intel brethren. This also means that Intel produces a bit less heat as well. In general, if money is no object, Intel is typically considered the superior choice at this time. What the future holds, who knows? If operating on a tighter budget, however, well, AMD suddenly becomes a far more tempting choice. As can be seen from this presentation, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for building a gaming PC, nor is there a one-size-fits-all solution in terms of brand names. It's my hope that this presentation has helped clear up some of the preconceived notions floating around out there as regards the construction of a gaming PC. As long as you remember to obtain a suitably powerful enough power supply without going overboard, you match up your requirements with what you intend to play, and you pair up motherboard and CPU options with what features you will actually need, you can come out with a suitable PC that will give you plenty of years of enjoyment without breaking the bank. That concludes this presentation. I thank you for your time and your consideration.